In this episode, we are starting with one of the easiest ways new technicians lose time, waste money, and create frustration for themselves and their users, and that is replacing the wrong part in a mobile device because the symptom seemed obvious at first glance. A cracked screen looks simple until you learn that a display problem might come from the panel, the touch layer, the backlight, a loose internal connector, or even a battery that has swollen and pushed against the assembly from underneath. A battery complaint sounds straightforward until you hear that the device only shuts down during video calls, only charges with certain cables, or only reports bad battery life after a software update changed how power is used. Good support work begins with careful thinking, because the cost of a mistaken part order is not just the price of the part itself, but also lost time, delayed fixes, extra shipping, repeat work, and a user who starts to lose confidence in the technician before the real problem has even been identified. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first big idea to lock in is that a technician should never treat a symptom and a failed part as if they are the same thing, because a symptom is only a clue and not a conclusion. If a user says the device is dead, that could mean the battery no longer holds a charge, the charging port is damaged, the power button is not making proper contact, the internal board is not distributing power correctly, or the screen is dark even though the device is actually on. If a user says the keyboard does not work, that could point to physical key failure, liquid damage, a disconnected cable, a software setting that changed input behavior, or a swollen battery that is physically pressing upward on the keyboard area and changing how the keys feel. This is why experienced technicians slow down before disassembly, because they know that the cheapest and fastest repair usually begins with the best understanding of what the complaint really means in everyday use, and that understanding comes from pattern recognition rather than guesswork. Screens are a perfect example of why mobile hardware support can fool beginners, because users often describe every visual problem as a broken screen even when the exact failure is more specific. A front glass layer can be cracked while the image underneath still looks normal, which tells you the device may still have a working display but damaged outer glass or touch assembly, depending on how the device was built. A screen that lights up but shows lines, black blotches, strange colors, or a half-visible image usually points more strongly toward damage in the display panel itself, while a screen that looks fine but does not respond to taps or swipes suggests a problem with the touch digitizer or the connection that carries touch input. When a device stays black but still vibrates, plays sounds, or receives notifications, that often means the system is running and the user interface is alive, so the fault is probably in the display path rather than in the entire device. And that distinction matters because ordering a full replacement assembly when only one layer failed can cost more than necessary, while ordering only glass for a device that needs a complete assembly can leave the technician stuck with the wrong part. Battery problems are just as deceptive, and they are especially common because users experience them as inconvenience rather than as a visible hardware defect. A weak battery can show up as short runtime, sudden shutdowns at higher charge percentages, slow charging, heat during normal tasks, or a device that becomes unstable when it is unplugged even though it seems fine when power is connected. A battery that has physically swollen can create a completely different kind of complaint because the user might notice that the case is separating, the keyboard feels raised, the screen looks lifted from the frame, or the device rocks on a flat desk, and all of those are danger signs that point toward mechanical pressure from inside rather than an ordinary software issue. New technicians sometimes misread these symptoms and order a screen, a keyboard, or a case component first. But the smarter interpretation is that the battery may be the root cause, and once you understand that, the apparent failure in one area starts to make sense as a side effect of pressure, distortion, or unreliable power delivery. Keyboard problems are another area where the user's language can send a beginner in the wrong direction if the complaint is not unpacked carefully. When someone says keys are not working, you need to think about whether only a few keys have failed, whether the whole keyboard is unresponsive, whether typing produces the wrong characters, whether the issue appears after a spill, or whether the keyboard works in bursts and then stops again. A few dead keys often point toward localized physical damage, wear, or contamination, while an entire keyboard failure makes you think more about a disconnected internal ribbon cable, damage to the keyboard controller path, liquid intrusion, or a deeper board issue rather than many individual keys suddenly dying at once. If the user says the keyboard feels strange, uneven, or hard to press, that physical description is valuable because it can hint at swelling from beneath, frame distortion, or prior repair damage. And those clues help separate a true keyboard replacement case from a situation where the keyboard is only the visible victim of another failing component. Storage problems can also lead to expensive support mistakes because many learners assume that if a device feels slow or will not boot, the storage device must have failed, even though the symptom pattern matters a lot. A failing storage component can show up as very long boot times, frequent freezing during file access, corrupted files, repeated repair attempts during startup, or a device that suddenly cannot find its operating system even though it worked normally the day before. At the same time, storage is not the only cause of those symptoms, because memory problems, overheating, operating system corruption, battery instability during updates, or connection issues inside the device can produce behavior that feels similar to the user. The smarter approach is to listen for the story around the failure, because a machine that became gradually slower and more unreliable over time sounds different from one that was dropped yesterday and now cannot detect its internal drive. And that difference affects whether you suspect wear, physical shock, a loose connector, or damage to the storage module itself before ordering parts that may not address the true fault. Audio parts often get less attention from beginners, but speakers are commonly replaced in mobile devices, and they produce symptom patterns that are easier to separate once you know what to listen for. A blown speaker often sounds distorted, crackly, weak, or uneven at higher volume, while a complete speaker failure usually means sound disappears from the device speaker but still works through headphones or an external connection. If the user says nobody can hear them during calls, that does not point to the speaker at all, because that sounds more like a microphone problem, an app permission issue, or a network quality problem, depending on the context of the complaint. This is why part matching depends on function rather than on the general idea of audio, because output and input are different paths. Internal speakers and earpieces can fail separately, and some users will describe any sound issue as the speaker being bad, even when the real fault lives somewhere else in the device or even outside the device. Cameras create their own kind of confusion because users often care about the result they are getting, such as blurry pictures or a black preview. But those results can come from several different causes. A rear or front camera that shows nothing but a black image while the rest of the device works can suggest a failed camera module, a disconnected internal camera cable, or a software restriction that prevents the camera from opening properly. Blurry pictures can point to physical lens damage, dirt on the lens, moisture under the lens cover, autofocus failure, or simple misunderstanding if the user is comparing a front-facing camera meant for convenience with a higher quality rear camera meant for detailed imaging. When the complaint is that the camera app opens and then crashes, the technician should resist jumping straight to part replacement, because application issues, storage pressure, permission conflicts, and operating system problems can mimic hardware trouble, and part ordering becomes expensive when the technician confuses a camera symptom with proof that the module itself has failed. Wireless problems are some of the most commonly misread complaints in mobile support because a user experiences them as the device not connecting, while the technician has to decide whether the fault is local hardware, network conditions, settings, or service availability. A failed wireless card or radio component may cause the device to stop seeing available networks, lose the ability to keep a stable connection at normal distances, or show that wireless features cannot be turned on at all. Even then, those symptoms can overlap with disabled settings, airplane mode, outdated software, corrupted drivers on devices that use them, damaged antennas, or a user standing in a dead zone with poor signal and assuming the device itself is defective. The important lesson is that weak connectivity is not automatically proof of a bad wireless part, because if several devices fail in the same spot, the environment becomes suspicious, while if one device consistently struggles across multiple known good networks, the suspicion shifts back toward the hardware path inside that device. One of the most useful habits a new technician can build is learning to separate primary failure from secondary symptom, because that prevents ordering the part that looks damaged instead of the part that caused the damage. A swollen battery can lift a screen, distort a keyboard deck, change how a touchpad feels, and even make the chassis look bent. So replacing the lifted screen alone would treat the result while ignoring the source. A drop can crack the outer glass, loosen an internal display connector, damage a camera module, and weaken a wireless antenna path all at once, which means the first obvious break may not be the only one that matters. Thinking this way keeps the technician from becoming too confident too early, because mobile devices are compact systems where components live close together. And when one part fails physically, it can stress neighboring parts, create misleading symptoms, and tempt a beginner into declaring victory after replacing the most visible broken piece. Before disassembly or part ordering, a technician should make a careful mental map of the complaint based on patterns of timing, trigger, severity, and consistency, because those clues narrow the likely failure more effectively than guesswork ever will. Timing matters because a problem that started right after a drop suggests a different path from a problem that slowly worsened over months. And severity matters because a device that fails only during gaming or video calls may be pointing toward heat, power demand, or battery weakness rather than a part that is simply dead all the time. Trigger matters because if the screen cuts out only when the lid moves or the device is tilted, that hints at a connection issue or flex-related damage. While consistency matters because an always-present problem usually has a different cause than one that appears only under certain conditions or only in certain locations. This style of reasoning is what helps support work feel disciplined instead of reactive, and it lowers the chance of buying parts based on frustration, pressure, or the false comfort of doing something quickly before understanding what is actually wrong. Part ordering brings another layer of risk because even when the technician has correctly identified the failing component, the replacement still has to match the device in the right way. Mobile devices often have multiple versions of screens, batteries, keyboards, storage modules, camera assemblies, and wireless components that look similar from a distance but differ in size, connector shape, mounting points, power needs, firmware compatibility, or country-specific layout. A keyboard might physically fit but have the wrong key arrangement, a battery might match the outline but not the connector, and a display assembly might be built for a slightly different revision that uses another cable or frame design. This is why careful support work includes understanding the device model, generation, and exact part relationship before ordering, because a correct diagnosis paired with an incompatible part still produces delay, wasted budget, and another round of avoidable support trouble that the user experiences as the technician simply getting it wrong. There is also a judgment call behind every replacement, because not every failed part should automatically be replaced just because it can be. The technician has to think about the age of the device, the cost of the part, the likelihood of hidden damage, the value of the user's time, and whether the repair solves the real problem or only postpones a larger failure that is already developing. A simple battery replacement in an otherwise healthy device can restore useful life and make perfect sense, while a storage replacement in a heavily worn system with failing hinges, weak battery life, and intermittent display issues may not be the smartest use of effort if several major problems are already piling up together. What separates a thoughtful technician from a parts changer is the ability to turn messy user complaints into likely hardware stories without rushing to certainty. Because when a user says the device dies fast, loses sound, stops connecting, takes blurry pictures, or has a bad screen, the skilled response is to ask what exactly happens, when it happens, whether it is constant or intermittent, and what changed before the problem started, so the repair decision is based on a clear picture instead of a shallow first impression. The main lesson to carry forward is that mobile hardware support becomes much less intimidating when you stop looking for a single dramatic clue and start looking for symptom patterns that point toward the most likely failing part. Screens, batteries, keyboards, storage components, speakers, cameras, and wireless parts all fail in recognizable ways. But the real skill is learning that a user's first description is only the beginning of the diagnosis and not the end of it. Careful thinking before disassembly protects the device, the budget, the technician's time, and the user's confidence, because it reduces unnecessary part orders and keeps the repair focused on the most probable cause instead of the most obvious surface complaint. When you develop that habit early, you are not just learning how to replace hardware, but how to reason like a technician who understands that the best repair often begins long before a screw is removed or a replacement part is placed on the bench.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.